Well, great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Chris, for the great introduction. And it's great to have Dr. Wegrzyn back 1 year later from when we spoke last. And maybe just have you kind of launch into, gosh, last year it was truly a concept kind of on paper, starting to get up and running last year. But now you really have a lot of projects really starting to gear up. Talk to us about what's happened this last year.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. We're reminiscing on what we were talking about a year ago, where we hardly had any programs launched. We had just really kicked off ARPANET-H with this crew. So for those who don't know about ARPA-H, I still hold the title of newest government agency in the federal government. We are here to bring that ARPA model from the DARPA idea set, where you bring program managers in from a bottoms-up approach to identify some of the biggest problems in health to solve, and come at it with a sense of urgency and resources to really solve these problems that the rest of the federal ecosystem and the private sector can't tackle. And so one of the things that we did last year that I thought was pretty ARPA of us was when we got our authorities. It's really important for a government agency that Congress sets your rules of how you can, what is your kind of freedom to operate. They gave us 3 sites where we could be. They said, ARPA-H, thou shalt be in 3 geographies. And so we ended up competing that across the United States, and we did it to empower our agency, actually. So unlike DARPA, that has a Department of Defense that will pick up successful programs, in health, that is not HHS. It really has to go to the private sector, to patients, to customers. And so we thought hard about how do we bridge that, and we competed across the United States for a hub and spoke network to empower that with Stakeholder and Operations Hub in DC, and Cambridge, Massachusetts won our Investor Catalyst Hub, and Dallas, Texas actually won our Customer Experience Hub, so bringing CX and UX forward. So on that foundation, we then have hired 21 program managers, each representing a completely different technical area and programs that I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment, but where they can go after those big challenges in health and make those a reality.
Oh, that's great. Yvonne?
I was just going to say, we remember this competition very, very, very vividly, because I remember the day that it came up on the ARPA-H website. It was the 1 year anniversary, saying that we're going to compete this out. And I talked to the governor and I said, well, we have to decide. Are we going to work together and try to really win this, or are we going to stand down? And if we want to do it, we're going to really have to work hard. And she said, no, hell yes, let's go win this thing. And it was a lot of work. And you put us through a lot of kind of multiple rounds. And I think it was actually an example, though, of how healthcare should be working. We were all aligned around this very inspiring and ambitious mission of ARPA-H, of how do we think bigger about this next set of issues around equity, around getting cures to patients faster, about finding inefficiencies. So all of the things we just talked about in the last panel. And we worked across as a team. So we had, many of our awesome team members are here across Mass Life Sciences, our Quasi, Mass Medic, Mass Bio, all of our hospitals, our medical schools, our private sector, amazing startups like Celino. Everybody worked together, and we were so grateful that we were able to win this hub. I'm curious, though, now reflecting on this, you've now selected us and you've selected Texas. How are you feeling about the progress that you've made, and any kind of things that you're proud of and you want to celebrate, or any things that maybe are surprising or disappointing that we feel like we're behind on? Give us some feedback.
Okay, likewise. So, I think looking back on just some of the successes, one of the things that's been really important for me as the first director, and I think for every future director of ARPA-H, is health is not a political or partisan activity, right?
Mark just said right here, yes.
It's
about humanity.
Well, I would have never dreamed of the day where Maura Healey and Governor Abbott both had a positive press release about ARPA-H on the same day. But it really set the tone, I think, of how we're going to approach the challenges that we face. We're all going to roll up our sleeves, work together to solve these challenges. And through the Hub and Spoke Network and the Investor Catalyst Hub, one of the areas that we've been able to work really closely with the VentureWell team and you all is on women's health. Mm-hmm. And so about 6 months later, after we launched ARPANET-H, we launched a series of programs that are really exciting, and I'd love to talk about a few of those in particular, but we weren't investing in women's health, and this has been underfunded for decades. Women weren't even in clinical trials until the 90s. Many animal models are still male exclusively in experiments. And through the Investor Catalyst Hub, we were actually able to approach funding across women's health in a different way. And so we had 6 program managers stand up with some of the topics that they wanted to pursue. And through the Investor Catalyst Hub, we created a new way to do business, which is a 3-pager to explain, what's the problem you're trying to solve, how's it done today, and what's new in your approach. And then from those that we were really excited about, that our program managers selected, we did a 30-minute VC-style pitch. And so it's one of the reasons that we're here today in this forum is, showing investors there's different ways the federal government can use business models to lean into that translational activity, but also bring non-traditional players to the table. And in the next month or so, we're going to be announcing those awards. And so from that initial launch in the February timeframe of this year to award in 6 months, that's also a pace and the urgency that we really try to bring forward.
I love it. Well, the patients are waiting. I love the sense of urgency in all this. Any feedback on things that maybe you would have hoped would have gone better or different?
Well, I think it's more feedback. I think at ARPA-H we try to be really good listeners. And so I always tell my program managers the difference between a good program manager and a great program manager is listening. And listening to a lot of the communities that we've met here, as just one example, at our kickoff, you brought La Colaborativa, which is a great community organization. You gave me the feedback that some of the community orgs are having trouble figuring out how to work with ARPA-H because they're not those advanced research projects, but yet they have really well-defined problems that technology could be solving for. And so actually just last week, we had Patricia, one of our portfolio leads here, who launched the Emerging Health Innovators initiative, which is trying to bring communities closer to working with technologists at ARPA-H, but also young innovators that may come from not the big Ivies, but some smaller universities or settings where they wouldn't normally be able to take those big technical risks that we insist on. And we want to then create that environment that they can apply, and only apply once they're working with ARPA-H, be supported by our transition mechanisms, by our program managers, by experts, like everybody in our Hub and Spoke network, which is now more than 1,000 members, to be able to help them translate those sciences.
I love it. Yeah, and we were very intentional about how we competed, and we decided to start the pitch day with La Colaborativa and Mass General Brigham, because these are 2 very different organizations. La Colaborativa working in Chelsea with in many cases, underserved healthcare communities, and then Mass General Brigham at the forefront. But the way that they partnered together during the pandemic to bring care and to do the work on the ground was really powerful. And I think that's a model, and we would love to see both ends of that spectrum, Mass General Brigham and La Colaborativa, and folks like them be able to participate in ARPA-H.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Kind of following up on just what you're talking about, and I know we've got a lot of the program managers here in town and here at the meeting today. Yeah. Can you talk us a little bit through how the program manager model is working and how that's different from what you've done with DARPA and your past experience as well, and maybe a little bit more about how people can kind of get engaged with the program managers?
Yeah, well, I've been in startups before, and I was sharing with you, having a startup in the federal government is a whole other level of challenges, as well as in a post-COVID work environment where there's a lot of expectation that, you won't have necessarily a large home base where everybody is present every single day, and certainly not program managers who need to be out in the ecosystem. So for our program manager team and our leadership team, we actually get, this is different than what DARPA does, we get our program managers together once a month to talk about the challenges that we're facing, often have an immersive activity, maybe with a hospital, maybe with a company. And actually all of our program managers are here at WMIF because they need to be building those relationships with the transition community. I think there's been over 100 meetings that we've set up to talk to potential teams that we may be investing in, but also investors who may want to watch and see the development that we're pushing forward. Another big difference, as I mentioned, was the need to transition that we don't have, that DARPA doesn't have. But we also have a lot of collaboration across our offices. So at DARPA, there are many different offices, one focused on satellites and weapons, and another on biology that don't really interact a lot. But at ARPA-H, we absolutely have to collaborate collaborate. And in our second year now, what I'm really trying to help the teams, where the first year was focused on developing our Scalable Solutions Office, Proactive Health, Health Science Futures, and Resilient Systems, which are kind of investment areas, which have done incredible things. But for the sum of our parts, there's also, I think, as an agency, we can address entire topic areas that we couldn't do elsewhere. So cellular therapeutics is one example from our investments in Body and Nitro, and the Nebula project. And we have Celino here, who are the second place winners in our first ever ARPA-H Dash, and now an awesome startup performer from the Boston area. Those strategic investments across the whole spectrum of cellular therapeutics, as a collective, our agency should advance that field so that it can be more cost effective, more accessible, and more personalized for everybody.
Oh, that's great.
I'm just curious, so, and I've been so inspired by you and your team and the program managers especially on these different areas that they're passionate about. So women's health being a big one, and we were so proud to host First Lady Jill Biden and Secretary Becerra here to kick that off, but also rural health, health equity, cell and gene therapy, all these different areas. In the last panel, we talked a lot about the role of AI and technology, and I don't think AI is a thing on its own. It's probably going to impact everything. How do you all at ARPA-H think about AI? And it's relevant because our state is also working on this AI task force. And I'm curious how you and your program managers think about that.
Yeah, so we're very lucky that we have quite a bit of talented program managers and mission office directors that have expertise in this area. We're able to not only bring that into our programs, but also how we do business as an agency and try to be a data-driven agency. I was actually telling somebody we have tools inside the agency that help us understand even how to have conversations across government to understand, what
Can
might
I get
be.
those tools?
Yeah, there always has to be a human in the loop, but it does help us. Again, our PMs are here for a term limit of 3 years, so every 2 weeks that goes by, 1% of their time is up, and so everything we can do to make them more effective and efficient is critical. So that's on how we do business, but in the programs, I'd love to highlight just a few of even some of the open solicitations that we have now. Precise AI is a program that is open now for abstracts and proposals, but really looking at all the 800 plus FDA approved or authorized tools in AI that are developed on and trained on data sets that once those tools go out into the real world and encounter real people and demographics and geographies they might not have seen before, performance degrades. And so this program is aimed at trying to prevent that degradation through tools to sort of patch and improve that going forward. And we actually have a PM from the FDA who's come over to help solve that really specific problem as just one example.
I love it.
We do have a question from the audience here. Might be kind of interesting. Talking about, can you talk a little bit more about how much you're working with the academic world versus the for-profit world, and are those kind of applications coming in kind of jointly, or are you kind of matching them up if there are similar interests or focus on areas?
Yeah, so we are agnostic to the diseases that we address, the technologies that we pursue, but also whether we work with academia, industry, and even government. And so those applications that come in, we could fund any of those or teams therein. We do have an antimicrobial resistance effort as just one example, actually out of Harvard Medical School, but Harvard as the prime funds a total of 18 team members. Oh, wow. And that's what's going to be required to get these new devices out into hospitals. So maybe a better way to look at it is how we assess every application. And so it starts with the criteria, the technical merit. So is this ambitious? Is this ARPA hard? Is this something that only we could do? And will this create a future that we want to live in that advances our mission? If the answer is yes, then we look at the team. Is this the right team to do it? And so does this need to be commercialized? And we need to make sure that's built in. And then last but not least, we don't look for lowest bidder, we look for cost realism. And so are the funds and resources requested commensurate for the work that's been proposed? And so for most of our programs, we end up funding $100, $150 million across multiple solutions that we will explore that entire solution landscape towards solving that problem. And the budgets are built in a way that there's an attrition is built in. So our program managers will have to make a down select because the responsibility is on them to solve the problem, not necessarily to fund any individual team in perpetuity.
Yeah. Interesting.
And kind of following on that, I know we talked a little bit before about working with folks at HHS, whether it's FDA or even NIH, on what makes the most sense for different things and be in different places, and how you work with your program managers to work with the folks at FDA. Can you talk a little bit more about that process and how that's worked out?
Yeah, so what's so important to know about ARPA-H is we are a transactional funder. We are here to be catalytic, demonstrate what's possible, but we have to transition things out into the ecosystem. This also includes for our federal brothers and sisters. So we're an independent operating division within HHS, and but we're very connected with our sister agencies. As one example, Darshak Sanghavi used to be at CMMI, is also a cardiologist, and through his understanding of that agency, but also our unique authorities, he launched the HEROES program, which is really looking at value-based payment for patient outcomes. And so this is something that we've designed in partnership, or he's designed in partnership with CMS. And if he's successful, that is then the data that can then influence the policy that may be able to change and reform the way that CMS does business. And so that is what ARPAs are really good at. We don't set regulatory or policy, but we can create the data sets that influence that. We have even one additional authority with FDA that we can reimburse FDA for work to bring our programs out into the real world. And so programs like Precise AI actually require FDA to participate, because we know they will need to regulate those end products and be supportive of whatever solutions that we might be bringing forward. And so it's a huge advantage, I think, to working with ARPA-H. We don't take any equity. We're non-dilutive, truly non-dilutive, but we can also bring those other partners to the table to accelerate bringing technologies to market.
One thing that I know you and I have spoken about, I think might be interesting to share with the group, is that healthcare, change in healthcare takes a long time sometimes. And so I love the ambition and the mission of ARPA-H and how you're accelerating and kind of sparking these investments. Help us think about, you and I have talked about we're living in kind of uncertain political times. There's an election happening. There's some changes that have been proposed in Capitol Hill about NIH. How do you think about the role of ARPA-H, and how do we ensure that there's consistency in these awesome programs that you're kicking off?
I think it's a great question, and rewind 2 years ago when I came into ARPA-H, we didn't yet have our permanent authorities, and so it was a bit of a leap of faith.
Talk about risk-taking as a leader, yes.
Well, but I was so passionate that for this to work, we had to make sure that we had those authorities locked in, that we were independent as an agency, that we could have program managers be the decision makers, that the director could be a decision maker. Importantly, that they're all term limited, right? So these are things that are not only not in NIH, but other parts of the federal ecosystem. So we were very successful in getting our authorities. I'm so proud. We use them every day. We want to show Congress that we're appreciative, and we do use them. And so there has been some legislation written that would potentially roll us up under NIH, and that I go to the Hill a lot to explain how that would not be a successful path forward for an ARPA. So it's so important to keep us independent. We're not earmarked. We're disease agnostic, and the more programs that we launch, the more wonderful program managers that we get, the more that we build ARPANET is each one of those is a bigger differentiator to just demonstrate that we do business differently.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I think we've also talked about how this is a bipartisan issue in healthcare, and people care about innovating across all of our states and across all the spectrum. And I think there's opportunities for states to continue the work, right? So we've talked a lot about how we can partner our Massachusetts resources with the programs that ARPA-H is doing, so that we can amplify and also continue the work, even beyond the initial investments from ARPA-H.
Yeah, it's been one of the best things about working with Congress is every member that I've spoken to, you can very quickly find the component of health that they are passionate about, either because they've experienced something themselves or in their state there's a unique problem. And so I'm actually really excited about states as transition partners. And so the way that the state of Massachusetts thinks about things often as a whole statewide effort is different than other parts of the country. And I think it's exciting for the program managers and just for the agency in general to be looking to you all as partners in that way.
I love it.
Yeah.
We're so grateful.
Great. Well, this next question kind of flows into one we already had, which is sort of what are your next goals for ARPA-H? What do you have upcoming in the next year to 2 years, and where do you see ARPA-H going?
So it's really important to know, again, re-emphasizing that we're a bottoms-up organization. And so the ideas come either from the program managers themselves or from the project that they select from our open solicitations. And so sort of organic to that model are some gaps in areas that we aren't investing in. And so women's health was one of those that we certainly put $100 million and changed that trajectory. Looking forward, the other areas that we see major gaps are pediatrics. Also, mental health is an area of passion for a lot of the ARPA-H team, but we haven't had big investments in those areas. Medical devices is another one that we haven't yet really had a focused investment. That one's a place where I think we have really unique authorities that can help advance that entire field. But again, not being prescriptive, but more flagging for the audience, like some areas that we would love to sort of hear your ideas, because we don't yet have big portfolio items in these spaces yet.
Okay, no, that's great. One other one kind of following on to that, obviously there had been a lot of talk about the cancer moonshot and the oncology efforts. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of where ARPA-H fits in that whole cancer moonshot and oncology?
Well, that was really interesting because when we were announced, it was actually on the anniversary of Cancer Moonshot here at the Kennedy Library and the anniversary of the speech. And President Biden reinvigorated Cancer Moonshot and announced ARPA-H literally 1-2 sentences, right? So there's a little bit of confusion early on that we were a cancer agency. We're not. We're disease agnostic. But we got a lot of really compelling proposals in this area, but also some really rock star program managers addressing this. And I want to highlight, I think Ilana Hanku is here, one of our PMs, who really saw this opportunity to look at precision surgical interventions and reimagine the operating room, where you could have imaging that could help you see tumor margins, that you could eliminate the need in some cases for a pathologist and in real time understand if you've gotten all of the cancerous tumors. And so this is certainly addressing moonshot goals, but on our terms, right? And we're so lucky, the president not only announced the PSI project, but when we gave the awards out last month, he and Dr. Biden wanted to go and actually to Tulane to kind of celebrate those first awards going out.
Oh, that's great.
So we only have a few minutes left. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked the last group, which is that you have an incredible group of leaders from around the world here who all are passionate about healthcare and play in different parts of the ecosystem. What are the 1 or 2 things that you would encourage them to do, or the big levers that you would love for them to focus on, for all of us to focus on together?
Yeah, I think, we would love to work with some of the investors who maybe there's this thing nagging in the back of your brain as something that would really impact the future of health, but you just can't invest in it. It's too risky. That's where we come in, and we would love to have that conversation with our leadership, with our program managers, to explore, what would it take for us to get to those proofs of concept to bring this across the finish line. Would be really an important piece for us. And then the other is, while we certainly are in a life sciences and investment center here in Cambridge and Boston, how are we making sure that we're not leaving anybody behind in the rest of the ecosystem? And so I'm just going back to the PSI program. As a proof of concept under that program, one of the proofs has to be done in a rural setting. And we brought in rural docs and surgeons to help advise our program managers to make sure that we can successfully deliver that on the back end of our program. And so being able to bridge and make sure, we're not just looking for financial return on investment, we're looking at the return on investment for all Americans, for taxpayer dollars. So helping us bridge that gap is really essential to successfully work with us.
Well, there's definitely a call to action. So there's, for folks in the audience who have ideas or who are passionate about some of these programs, it sounds like there's some opportunities to work together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. One last one for me. I know that in one of the other panels from your ARPA-H folks that you had, a real kind of call for people to join in at ARPA-H. And, there's how has everything kind of built up over this last year where you've been hiring people? Are you kind of where you want to be? Are you still hiring a lot of people? Maybe it's a good call for people in the room here, or organizations, about how they can work with you at ARPA-H.
Well, we are absolutely still growing, and we're always hiring. 20 years from now, whoever's sitting here is going to be hiring, and that's the nature of the model, and because of the 3-year term for the program managers. I can't believe, next year, our program manager, our first program managers will be up term, which makes me really nervous and sentimental. But it's amazing how far we've come as an agency. And so I would say, bring us your network. The best applicants that we've got, the best program manager candidates, come from the network of people that kind of understand the model, and the opportunity. So we'd love to hear from you in that perspective for sure. The other is, we have 21 program managers. I think probably more like 50, 60 is where our steady state should be. We need a growing budget to match that. So we have a $1.5 billion appropriation every year. We've had $4 billion to date. So it's a nice funding sum that we can invest, but to really, I think, maximize the opportunity and the potential of what ARPA-H is, we do need to grow that budget.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
It's a
thank you.
So
great
grateful.
great adventure.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you
you so
Yvonne.
much.
Thank you.